Today's guest is an expert in strategic development. He helps 13,000 members and 60 industry partners succeed in achieving their goals, whether starting, running, or improving their business. Coming from a family of fitness industry royalty, he's leading one of the most trusted and fastest growing associations in the world of well-being. Please join me in welcoming Josh Levy, founder and CEO of the Association of Fitness Studios, to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Welcome to Newport Beach.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, we hear a lot about boutiques. It's the new thing. It's the new kid on the block. And my guess is that there's a lot of misinformation and people sort of not fully understanding what it's about, how people are making money. I guess, what's the most interesting and I suppose surprising thing about you and this organization that probably most people wouldn't know?
Oh my gosh, where do I start? This segment of the industry is one that we know is exploding, right? The buzzwords that you hear in the boutique space, you hear a lot of the companies that have a lot of money behind them. You hear of the Soul Cycles, the Orange Theories, the F45s, the 9 Rounds. I could go on and on and on. But there's the other side of the business, which are all the mom and pops, the independent side, and which are being run by these entrepreneurial trainers, these coaches, these instructors that have a new or a different vision for where they want their career to go. And they're creative people by nature. They want to go out, they want to do something different, they want to have their name on the side of a building if necessary. And so I think the most surprising thing for us and all the research that we've done is how many of these individuals really want to start their own business. In the latest research report, we found 40%, nearly 40% of all fitness professionals are thinking in the back of their mind, one day I want to start my own boutique studio, which is an insane number if you start extrapolating that data. There's, I think, 280,000 personal trainers according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But then you factor in group exercise instructors, you factor in a variety of other groups, cycling instructors. The numbers start to become massive. And so for us, I think it's an exciting opportunity to be in this space because it does not take a lot of overhead, does not take a lot of money to open up your own business. So it's a great space to be in right now. And for us, I think the most surprising thing is twofold. One, how many want to start, but then how many are also seeking out expertise and education to understand what it takes to become successful in this space.
Right,
And there's a lot.
Yeah. So to give people a bit of background, tell us a little about Josh, how you got into the industry, a little bit about, touch on your father as well and his involvement, and what it is that you guys are doing at the moment.
Yeah, so I am third generation of starting a fitness association. Both my grandfather, Mort Levy, started the National Court Clubs Association back when tennis clubs and racquetball clubs were the thing. And then my father came along and helped start a little company called URSA, built the URSA trade show. And so the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. And so, of course, I come along. My background is very much on the management side of fitness. I have never gotten my fitness certification as a trainer or anything like that. I've always managed clubs, big box clubs in the Chicago market, fitness formula clubs, who Gail Landers is the owner of. So I was able to learn under him and the mentorship that I got there, and had teams of trainers that I worked with. And then from there, of course, we're talking probably in about 10 or so years ago. It's when I was doing the big box clubs. And from there, it became very evident, and this was before the boutique boom happened, that a lot of trainers I'm starting to see had higher aspirations, more aspirations to do more with their career. They were sick of getting to the club at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. for a 5 o'clock client. And then you had that split schedule where you train in the morning and you leave for lunch and you come back and you're working until 8, 9 o'clock. And they just wanted something different. And so a lot of the people that were working under me, these teams that I had, these trainers that I had, were leaving to start their own businesses. And some were finding success, but a majority of them were not. And it's ultimately because they were great trainers, but that lack of business expertise was something that was so evident and missing in so many of them. There's so much more to starting your own studio than just being a great trainer, right? And what I like to say is the moment that you put your name on that lease, you have just transitioned from John Smith, the personal trainer, to John Smith, the entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, you need a completely different set of skills than just your training expertise. You need to run your training expertise parallel to that of your business expertise if you're going to have a chance in this market. Because now more than ever, it is so easy to get into this space. You can have a rich uncle, you could have a credit card, and you can open up a functional training space in a matter of, a couple months. I mean, with all of these brick and mortar locations going out of business, like the Radio Shacks that used to be around, the Toys R Us's, there's all this open space. And a lot of the landlords that own these strip malls are seeking individuals like a fitness business to come in because it's repeat customers. You've got customers that are coming back sometimes a few times a week. And so I recognized this early on.
And just to pause on there for a moment then, because you made a very interesting point, and it applies, I guess, in business in general. You can be working at a skill and you can be very good at it. And I guess the natural progression is to go from being, I guess, a performer, a trainer, an artist, and then to a business person, which you said obviously is very, very different. And in some cases, the bit that you've really built your success on, you've probably made your money, you're almost stopping doing that to wear a different hat that maybe you're not good on. What advice would you give to someone that's in that position to kind of, to make sure they're not sort of giving away the crown jewels, but to be successful? What have you seen anything? Is there any advice you can give on that point?
Yeah, there's a lot. So ultimately, if you want to make that transition, there are several things you have to do. One, make sure that it's what you want to ultimately do, because there's a lot of time that people think, I'm done with what my current position is in this called a big box health club. And I don't understand why I'm giving part of my revenue back to the club. I want to seek it all for myself. So I'm just going to start my own business and reap all the rewards. It doesn't work that way. Ultimately, when you're looking at the progression of where you want your career to go, there are so many other things that that go into starting your own business, from the marketing expertise, from the operations, from the accounting side, from just an overall business strategic perspective. It's interesting. When you look at it, I talk to a lot of just industry trailblazers in this space, and whether it's your Todd Durkins or other people that have found success and they're very well known in what they do. And I asked Todd, I said, what was it like when you first started? He goes, oh, Josh, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no clue. And too many people are finding themselves in that position. Todd was lucky because he's an incredibly smart, personable person, and he was able to figure it out as he went. But in today's competitive landscape, there's no opportunity to do that. You can't guess and be wrong. And so ultimately, a lot of these trainers or coaches or instructors are in this space, and I challenge them, maybe you don't want to start your own business. Maybe you just need to find a better work environment that's more conducive to what you want as a trainer. But if you are going to go start your own business, you got to make sure that you find a mentor. You got to go out there and make sure you do your competitive analysis. You got to understand that the clients that are whispering in your ear that says, hey, why don't you go do this? There is a convenience factor with why they're training with you. Yes, you could be an amazing trainer and they've seen results, but if you're going to open up your studio 10 miles away and you maybe live in a Midwestern climate and it's snowing outside, they're going to be very hard pressed to jump in their car and go see you when their studio or their health club is right around the corner. So there's a lot of factors that ultimately play into, is this the right move for me in my future?
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to make, and it in some cases is not a progression, but if you've got, as you say, if you've got the right team or people around you, you can certainly transition. But it's, if you're a super talented trainer, then don't give that away for something that you're not talented, because it's going to be tough, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, you can talk to a lot of different people in this space. And when you start your own business, people will say, well, do I have to give up my training? That's what I got into this business to do. And if I start my business, do I have to completely step away from that? And depending on who you talk to, some consultants will say one thing or the other. It's my belief that because you start your own business, you don't have to stop doing what you love. You just have to find the new normal, right? So if you're going to take some clients early in the morning, you can take clients early in the morning. You got the rest of your day to work on your business, So you don't necessarily have to give up what you love doing and why you got into the space in the first place to help people, but you have to find what your new normal is going to be so that you can make sure that you focus on your business, focus on the marketing, focus on the strategic development, focus on where you want that business to go, but ultimately continue doing what you love and helping your clients prosper and grow and get stronger and all those great things that comes with training.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
So coming back to your story then, so you was in Chicago, kind of what happened next?
Yeah, so was in Chicago, ultimately decided that, my career had hit a standstill in where I was and I wanted something more. And I've always kind of had an entrepreneurial drive. I've started other little businesses when I was in college and after college with friends. And I realized that there was a big opportunity here for an association. And because of my background, because I've assisted in other IHRSA shows behind the scenes, and I've kind of grown up in that space, I did a lot of my own research. I recruited a friend that I grew up with to actually kind of become a co-partner with me. And ultimately we had different visions, what ends up happening as an early business, and bought him out. And I realized that my father was not working with IHRSA at the time, and he was just a consultant in the industry. And I kind of thought, I've got a good resource that I could go to that knows a thing or two about growing fitness associations. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, what do you think about coming to work for me with this little association I'm thinking about putting together? And he did. He thought it was a great opportunity. It was a great, place to be. It was an interesting space that was just starting to make, its way mainstream. And so, yeah, my father actually works for me now, runs their sales and sponsorship department of AFS. And it's been great. It's been a great working relationship. It's been one of those things that doesn't work for everybody, but it works really well for us. And since then, the company has grown significantly. We've got a team now of about 10 to 15 people all over the country. Everybody works in a different state, which is incredible. My father lives in San Diego. I live in the Bay Area. We've got people in Michigan, Vancouver, Canada, Wisconsin, Chicago, all over the place. And it just works. We all have a passion for what it is that we're doing to really see anywhere. We like to view it from the pathway of a trainer who is just kind of starting out their journey. This is what they want to do. They have that entrepreneurial drive, but they're not sure if this is the right place for them. When I present around the country, I probably scare a lot of people out of starting their own business, which for me, I've done my job, if that's the case. It's unfortunate, but they don't realize how much goes into it. And so ultimately, when we created the company, we wanted to have two pathways. We wanted to create the value for the trainer that's wanting to start their own business, but ultimately that studio owner now that needs access to the resources, the research, the mentorship, the community building benefits, so many different things that have been accessible to the big box clubs for so long through other organizations, now dialed into the audience that really, really could use this stuff to understand how to grow their business in the future.
Right.
So,
okay. So in terms of the space then, I guess most people don't realize how big this. Well, at first, how do you define a boutique fitness studio?
That's a great question. So ultimately, with all the research we do, it ultimately comes down to size, number of clients, and things like that. So our kind of overall look at it, if you're looking top down, is anywhere from about 3,500 square feet and less, with about 300 paying members or clients, and they're generating in between about $300,000 and $500,000. Or excuse me, $300,000 and $500,000 in revenue for the current year. So that's typically the makeup of the studios that we're seeing as members of AFS. It can vary depending on where you are and where you're located. If you're a studio in New York, you're probably going to have a much higher amount of revenue, or probably take home maybe cash flow is going to be a little bit more than you are in rural Iowa or something like that. But ultimately, the makeup of a current studio is around there. Some are going to be a little bit smaller, some are going to be a little bit bigger.
Right.
So,
and in the criteria for being able to join then, is that based on size or revenue? What do you use to decide who's going to be part?
Yeah, anybody, really. It's incredible because we have members that are 500 square foot Pilates studios for somebody that just opened up an incredibly small little Pilates studio with 4 or 5 reformers. And then we have gyms that are 6,000, 7,000 square feet that just love the value that we provide and the benefits that we do, whether they wanted to connect with a mentor. We do roundtable discussions, the research that we have so they can understand if their business is profitable, if they're on the right track, understanding kind of what the industry is doing, where it's going, the trend data. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So there really isn't one makeup of what our members look like. It's all over the board, which is, for us, it's fantastic. It's been and it's international as
Oh,
well.
it's not just the USA.
No,
Right.
it's gone international with the relationships that we have, whether it's Australia or whether it's Ireland or all over the country, all over the world, people are joining because it's something that's really struck a nerve with kind of where the industry is headed. So, and you asked before, how many of these businesses, the numbers are astounding when you think it through. I mean, there's, I think, about 34,000 big box health clubs in the U.S. I think that's where the IHRSA has reported on most recently.
Right.
With studios, the number grows to over 100,000 because you're not only talking about personal training studios, you're not only talking about cycling studios, mixed martial arts studios. You've got, if you wanted to group in the CrossFits, you could group in the CrossFit boxes. But there are so many of these facilities that are popping up everywhere that it's almost impossible to keep tabs on where they all are. I mean, they're everywhere. They're in strip malls. They're in people's basements. They have their own studio. I mean, it is not hard to open up one of these locations. The problem is staying in business and being profitable because it's so competitive and because there are organizations and entities in this space that have a lot of money that when they come into the space can ultimately kind of take some business away.
Yeah. Do you have any idea about the value in comparison to the commercial? So you said in America there's about 34,000 boutiques. There's around about 100,000. Do you have any sort of feel for the difference in how much revenue the traditional clubs are making compared to these boutique studios?
I would have to take a look at IHRSA's most recent report because I know they report on that a lot. I'm sure it's quite a bit more, especially when you're talking about some of the biggest, fitness names out there, like your 24 Hours, like your Planet Fitnesses, a variety of those. They're in the millions, and when you look at a boutique studio, ultimately, the interesting thing is a boutique studio owner is a trainer, right? Almost all of the owners of a boutique studio are fitness professionals. And what's interesting is that they're not in this space to become a millionaire. They don't have those aspirations. They're a very different entity than a big box owner who ultimately has a corporate office most of the time and has GMs and has that stuff, but he's ultimately kind of behind his desk managing the business. A studio owner is a fitness professional at heart. And so for them, if they're making $50,000, $60,000, they're okay with that. Of course they would want to make more, but ultimately sometimes the space doesn't provide for that. So for them, they're doing it for purely on the passion. That is their passion. Their passion is to train people, to see the people find success and to have that high-touch, results-driven culture within their business. That's what it's about for them. Right. So it's a very, very, very different animal.
Yeah, and I've seen it somewhere, and I don't know where, but I've seen some numbers where it kind of says that the income generated collectively of the boutique market is larger. That's kind of why I asked the question.
Yeah.
Do you know if that information exists and where that may have come from?
I don't know. I know we didn't report that, but
Okay.
it would make sense if you just look at the sheer numbers of how many there are. And there are boutique studios in major markets that are generating a significant number of revenue. At our event, which we're having in April, Succeed, we have studio owners that are coming in that are charging a ridiculous amount to work out just within their culture, or to be trained by that owner. I mean, there's a studio outside of Boston, charges $300 a month, And I mean, there's a studio in San Francisco, this guy's making $2 million in 1,500 square feet of space. So it's not outside the realm of possibility for these businesses to make good money, but you ultimately have to know what you're doing and you have to have found a good niche and to really kind of create an amazing experience that just can't be duplicated anywhere else.
Yeah. In terms of growth, do you have a feeling or information to show how that is growing, in terms of, more studios? Are you measuring that through how many people join your organization, or have you got the ability to sort of see whether this is a sort of like a rapidly upward trending kind of category, or whether you're just finding out people that you didn't know existed?
Well, it's a little bit of everything. We definitely track it. We don't have any analytics based off of members that are joining. Just mainly the biggest reason is because it's such a segmented industry. There are so many different studios from a discipline standpoint, whether I'm a personal training studio, a multidiscipline, a yoga, Pilates, mixed martial arts, cycling, that can pop up at any time in any place. And it's difficult for us to track all. I wish they were all members, but they're not. But ultimately, what we've seen since we started the organization is in business, there's something called the S curve. in which we know that it happens in any type of business. It's happening with the big boxes right now in studios. So back in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, big boxes were everywhere. I mean, studios just weren't a thing. And so on this S curve, these big boxes were in this rapid acceleration phase. And what happens at the end of an S is a deceleration. And so what's happening now, except for some outside the box, there's other big boxes that are opening up, but not as many as there used to be. So what's happening now is the studio market is in that rapid acceleration phase, and they're opening everywhere. Everywhere. And I mean, the big name brands, but there's all the independents that are opening as well. Ultimately, it's my belief that it's going to taper off at some point. You've got the low income, clubs, you've got the high income clubs, you've got the boutiques that are in there that are commanding a higher price point for a variety of different reasons, which I'm sure we can talk on later. But as far as the growth pattern of boutiques, it's something that this industry, it's not surprising that it went towards, because we're in a service industry. And how do you provide the best service? Well, you provide the best experience. And it's very difficult to provide that great experience in a massive, massive big box health club. The experiences that they're getting are different touch points in a big box club, whether it's with the sales department, whether it's with the front desk, whether it's with your trainer, whether it's with the housekeeper, the massage therapist, whoever it is. Within a studio and within that small space, you have the opportunity to constantly have a touch point with somebody, whether it's other clients, whether it's other members, or the owner, that ultimately is always there to make sure that your needs are met. And so what's really interesting to me when you talk about this space is that for studios to be successful, the battleground now isn't so much on how I'm differentiating myself. It's more won or lost with customer service. And that's really how you're going to be able to differentiate yourself, because a studio that is doing things really well doesn't worry about a big name brand studio, I won't use names on this podcast, of others coming into the space, because they've already built out their culture. They're not worried about people leaving because they know and they've seen results where they are there. So ultimately, from a trend data perspective, it is growing. It is rapidly expanding. There are new disciplines, I feel like, that are coming out all the time. But ultimately for us, what we see is this rapid acceleration that we know is going to sometimes taper off in the future. It's just when that's going to happen, we don't know. Hopefully not for a long, long time, but it will happen in the future.
Yeah. I want to come on to numbers, but sort of leading into that, I'm interested, you mentioned the word experience, and there's a number of different elements that go into that experience. And as we spoke about earlier, a lot of traditional clubs, there isn't a huge amount of it. It's quite DIY fitness, and whether it's the decor, the people, the general ambiance, it's quite basic compared to some of the newer boutiques. Is there anything that you've been able to find out about, one, what do you think are the key elements of a successful experience, and have you seen any difference between people that are applying those, that recipe compared to the ones that don't, in terms of their financial performance?
100%. Absolutely. And it's a great question, because when I visited Fitness Quest 10 in San Diego, Todd Durkin's studio, there was an experience there and we were just meeting with Todd just to talk about our event. And from the moment you walked in, his team knew who I was. Like, oh, you're Josh, and my father was with me as well. Great, Todd's just finishing up with the client, he'll be right with you. That was before I even walked in. I walk in, they offer me a water. They ask me if anything's fine. I meet with Todd, he takes me around the studio. Every single trainer that was there stopped their workout. Todd said, hey, I just want to introduce you to somebody. This is Josh from AFS. Eye contact, experience was off the charts. Those are the studios that are prospering. And then you've got the other side of the spectrum, which is unfortunate, where we hear a lot of this, where somebody walks into their facility and there's nobody at the front desk, right? And somebody's trying to find information about the studio, about a class, whatever it may be, and the owner is, in the middle of a session. And so they see somebody come in, they say, oh, come back in 15 minutes, I'll be done. You smile because it's true, but that's unfortunate. That can't happen. And so people say, well, I don't have the finances to be able to hire a manager or somebody. Well, then maybe you got into business at the wrong time. I'm not saying it can't work, because it does work for some, but that can't be the experience that somebody has. And so there's absolutely a correlation between those experience-based fitness facilities, fitness studios that are doing things right, and the ones that ultimately do not and can't compete at that level. And so you're going to find two different pathways for those individuals, and ultimately the one that is still trying to figure it out and running around doing everything themselves is ultimately going to be the one that goes out of business, where the one that's understood how to create an amazing experience from the moment somebody walks in the door, those are the ones in which they're going to succeed. A very interesting point, and one that I bring up a lot of times in my presentations, is because of the competitive landscape in this space, you can walk down in any urban market. You're walking out a street in an urban market, and there's studios all over the place. Where I work out in the Bay Area, I work out at a studio. There's a yoga studio across the street, upstairs. A block down, there's a cycling studio. 2 blocks down the way, there's a yoga studio, and then another personal training studio. They're all over the place. And so if you were a studio on one side of the street, and there's another studio on the other side of the street, say it's the same discipline, say it's all personal training or multidiscipline or something like that, what's going to make a consumer want to go into one studio or the other? What is that thing going to be? And you can have the same type of equipment, the treadmills, of course, programming is a big part of it, and what the equipment is that you use and things like that. But what are the differentiators between those two studios? It's 2 things. It's you as the owner, and it's your people. Those are the differentiators. And how you leverage that and how you make that consumer feel like you are a part of that culture is the ones that are going to separate it. So when you go back to that Todd Durkin example, that is a completely different experience than another personal training studio that just doesn't have somebody at the front desk. So who are you going to choose? You're going to choose the one that makes you feel supported the entire time, every time. Yeah. And you'll pay a premium for that too. Yeah. So
it's interesting you say that. A lot of people we've had on the podcast, regardless of the type of fitness business, whether they're big box or high-end, low-end, that seems to be a common theme that they all talk about. Even the low cost, I was with someone a few weeks ago and they said exactly the same. They don't have a huge amount of staff, but it's really working on them and the service that those few people are offering.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can't coach personality, right? It's just, sometimes you just got to find the right people that ultimately buy into what it is that you're doing in your culture. I mean, that's where it comes from. And it starts at the top down, and you've got to create that culture first and that leadership that comes with it. But ultimately, you've got to find those go-getters. I mean, I was reading an article recently where there's a certain boutique fitness brand that, or fitness franchise, I should say, that in order to just be qualified for an interview, you have to have volunteered in your community a certain number of hours. So they actually want people that volunteer because they have this servant's heart, they call it, where when you're a trainer within this facility that you're also a therapist, right? I mean, your clients tell you things that sometimes you don't want to know, but it just comes up within that 60-minute session. And so you have to have this servant's heart. You have to be somebody that understands and listens and provides as much input as you can, without being a therapist. But it's difficult to find those types of people. So they have a very rigorous interview process to make sure that they find that. Another fitness group actually requires their employees to have taken a certain number of classes or worked out there a certain number of times to understand that culture, to understand what the workout's like, to understand what the feeling is when you walk in. All these little things that make up that entire experience is kind of what it's all about. So it all comes back to you and your people.
Yeah. And how does the financial model affect it? So one of the things that we've had a conversation on this with other guests is the pay-as-you-go membership conversation. There's a big difference in running those businesses, and certainly if you're franchising it adds a whole another level of complexity. What's your thoughts on that? Have you got any research back about that? Tell me the difference between those two.
There's a lot. There's so many different ways that you can structure a fitness business these days. We'd all know the old school membership model. You come in, you pay an initiation fee. You got a month-to-month membership most of the time, or a 12-month with a 13th-month free, things like that. And within that membership model comes use of anything. It can be open gym. It can be a couple personal training sessions that you got when you first joined, things like that. There are so many different ways to price things, and the things that we see within our space, you got to think about all the different types of studios. So if you're a group exercise-based studio, you're really just going to be a paper class, or there's going to be a 10-punch card, in which if you buy a 10-punch card, each class gets reduced from $20 to $16 for each class or something like that, and that works for them. They're not going to have anything different than that. Then you've got a lot of the other, and that works as well for like cycling studios as well. Then you've got a lot of the personal training studios or the multidiscipline studios that have different things that you might want to buy into. So you could do the membership model if they're large enough, in which you pay a certain amount and gives you access to X, Y, and Z. There's a tiered approach, which is one that we see work out really, really well, in which it works like this. So if you wanted to, you could come and you could join, and you would pay, it's called $40 a month, and that gives you the opportunity to work out at certain times of the day on your own if it's a large enough facility, and that's all. You pay $40, open gym, work out when you'd like to. But if you want to add on to that, it's a tiered approach where you could buy up to this one level and you could get open gym during these hours, but you also get a group of 6 boot camps or 4 small group training sessions and 2 one-on-one sessions, and that one is $80 a month. But if you want to go another tier up, it's layered pricing. Then you can get 4 personal training sessions, one-on-one. You can get 8 small group training sessions, and you can get our Saturday morning boot camp with our master trainer or something like that. So it's this layered system that works in a way that for any consumer that walks into my business, I know that I'm going to have an option for them. So that's the layered approach or the tiered approach towards training. The pay-as-you-go is another one that is also very, very important. So it's basically you just come in and you pay for what you need.
What's your thoughts on that? Because I know certainly people we've spoke to feel that although it certainly seems to be good for the consumer, it's very difficult to predict that income. At the end of the month, you're really got to sell a lot to kind of hit those numbers. As opposed to kind of having that guaranteed income and understanding your costs, a little bit easier. What would you say about that in your experience?
My experience is the pay-as-you-go is exactly what you said. It's difficult. And unless you're a really good salesperson and understanding how to constantly be renewing those pay-as-you-go packages, it's going to be difficult. The best trainers that I've been around understand if they go with that model, they understand that halfway through that pay-as-you-go plan, you're going to have to do your best job showcasing to your client the progress that they're making. Because if you don't, by the end of that package or that program, whatever it is, they can just say, you know what, I got what I needed, I'm out of here. The best trainers are the ones that showcase throughout that journey how much progress you're making. See what you're doing, see how by working on this with me, you're able to make this progress and this progression. You have to ingrain those little things within their head as they're going through that to understand that I need you to be here to make me hit my goals, whatever it may be. So my thoughts on the pay-as-you-go, I think it's good. It wouldn't be my number one approach to certain things based off the things you said, because it's not guaranteed revenue. It's one of those things that you're constantly having to chase revenue, and that's not the best way to build a business. I think there's an opportunity to do a blended approach with whether it's the pricing layers, whether it's the pay-you-go. I've seen a lot of businesses that are just program-based, where it's like, look, you're not just going to pay a membership every month and come in when you want. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a program for you, and it's going to be a 2-month program. And throughout that program, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then we're going to circle back after a month, and we're going to reevaluate and see how we want to extend this to make sure that your goals are met throughout the process. So it's a journey, but as the pay-as-you-go plan, there are a lot of advantages to it, but the disadvantages are many too, which for this space, you don't need more headaches in chasing money. You do want that reoccurring revenue, which can happen on a membership model or on the pricing tiers too.
And I think that's an interesting sort of point to pick out is that, if you do have that pay-as-you-go model, you've really got to kind of take that down a level and say, right, okay, now within my program, how am I ensuring there's a process in place to kind of keep them coming back, as you say, whether it's setting goals or some reason, because if it's not there, you're probably going to be struggling and not know why. So I think that's an important distinction. Really.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, part of that is it all comes back to the experience. The best businesses know the most about their clients, and so that they're setting them up for success throughout the way. I know businesses that are incredibly successful in the studio space, and they're successful because they know as much about their clients as possible. So whether it's their anniversary, whether it's their kids' birthdays, they have notes on every client. They just make mental notes when they're training. And so when it is their anniversary, they get flowers sent to their house from the studio, or when it's their kid's birthday, they send balloons or something like that, or a gift. Those are the little things that make up and make really the difference between the high performing and the ones that just are low performing, and it's widespread. There's a variety of other wow factors, as they're called, that can be built into that experience, but that's what the best ones are doing.
So if we look at sort of space, what have you found? And if I've got your report in front of me. What are some of the things about spaces? Is there kind of like an ideal size that profitable studios choose? 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 square feet. What have you learned about the success in how big it should be?
In a lot of the research we've done, one of the things that stood out the most as far as square footage and profitability is that if you're going to start a studio, a lot of times it makes more sense to build it out to be 2,500 square feet or less than be in that 2,500 square foot to 4,000 or 5,000 square feet. There's something about being able to leverage your square foot and your profitability in that smaller space than it is between the next kind of level up, if you will. And so that's been something really interesting, because a lot of times when you're starting your own business, people are like, I need this space to make sure that I've got this area to do high performance training, and this area for this, and this area for that. You're not going to leverage all that space, and you're going to have dead areas a lot of the time. It's the facilities that can run a business in sometimes as little as 1,500 square feet that maximize their space the best and understand pricing and understand how to use their space, whether it's small group training, you got 4 people going in certain areas, or one-on-one training at certain times. But what we've found is that those businesses that are 2,500 square foot and less are almost just as profitable as those businesses that are in between 2,500 and 5,000 square feet.
Really? Mm-hmm. So bigger in boutique is not really, biggest not best in
right.
in that space.
No, it's true. It's true. Sometimes smaller is the best way to go, and then ultimately, once you build out and you're basically at maximum capacity, which is in 1,500 or 2,000 square feet, talking a couple hundred clients, and you're still relatively profitable then too, depending on what your overhead is. To go up another level, does it make sense to expand as far as space, or does it make sense to expand as far as a second location? But then you run into a whole nother set of headaches where it's like, well, is the experience going to be the same? Who's going to run that business? As the owner, I got to bring in a manager over there and build it out, and I've done everything. So there's a lot of questions. So again, for that fitness professional who is trying to figure out, if this is the best route for me to go, do I expand or do I open up a second location?
Right. Okay. Back again to the report. You've got an interesting slide on the revenue per square foot. What are the people that are really doing well? How much are they generating per square foot, and how many people are they getting in there? What's the ideal number per class? Because I guess now what we're doing is we're sort of saying 1,500 to 2,000 seems to be that ideal size. How many people are going in there, and what are they generating per square foot on average?
When you look at square footage, the ones that are doing the best are people know when they're busy. Right? I mean, they know ultimately when they're going to generate the most revenue is going to happen early before work. It's going to happen sometimes in the middle of the day, not so much, because that's typically when drop-off happens, because kids are in school. You get a certain demographic that comes in during that time. And then your biggest money-making time is going to be after work, from about 5 o'clock until 8 o'clock at that time. So as far as generating the most amount of revenue during that time, what we're seeing is people that, again, know how to maximize their space on the floor. So what does that mean? Well, how many people can you basically get into your facility at one given time without it feeling like it's too claustrophobic? So those are the individuals that are maximizing their small group training, their one-on-one training. Typically, if they have an external studio, or not an external, a studio within a studio where they can do group exercise classes and pull in, $20 a person per class there, those are the ones they're going to find the most success, because they are maximizing all of the square footage that they have. So as far as pricing, I would have to go back and look at our report, to be completely honest with you, because the numbers are always in my head and I want to make sure that I reference the right number. But I can say with confidence that I do know that the facilities that are maximizing their square footage as far as the pricing that they're getting is going to be higher in the ones that I believe, if I think back, are the ones that are in that sweet spot as far as a studio is concerned, where they don't have those dead spaces, because that's just lost revenue there as well. So,
yeah. And do you know roughly how many people they're getting in? Is it 20 people, 40 people in these sort of smaller studios? Is there?
It is, yeah. It's ultimately when you look at how many people you can fit in. I mean, 1,500, 2,000 square feet is not a huge amount of space.
No, not with your changing rooms as well,
Exactly.
I guess.
Your changing rooms, you got your equipment and stuff like that. So ultimately, you're looking at in between about 20 and 40 people. That's really is kind of the sweet spot as far as
Between 20 and 40.
And then really when you look at it, there aren't a number of trainers that are working out in these facilities as well. You know, I mean, when you have a trainer or a coach or instructor that works at that facility, I think in the research that we found, if you're upwards of about 3,000 square foot, you've got about 4 trainers that are on staff. That's not a lot. So if you factor in, all right, I got 4 trainers and they're all doing a small group training session, that's 4 people each, 4, 8, 12, 16. So you're looking at 16, a couple one-on-ones. So you're, depending on the size, you're looking at around 30, 40 people at max during peak hours.
I've got the slide. I'm not sure whether this will help you. For those who can't see it, is that in terms of the question about revenue per square foot.
There you go.
Just explain what I'm looking at for the people who are on audio.
Yeah, absolutely. So from a financial metric perspective, it's interesting to see the growth over the last few years. So right now you're looking at about $90 per square foot.
Right.
So, and that's grown significantly just from 2 years ago, where it was about $80 a square foot. It dropped a little bit in 2016 to about 70, but now it's gone up to 89.
Why do you think that's, because I picked up on that and some of your early reports. What's causing it to go up? Is it that just people are switching on to the fact that, look, we need to be getting more out of this space and getting more people in there? Is that it? And they're getting more efficient at moving people through?
Efficiency is the number one thing. That's absolutely what it is. There are studios out there. The interesting thing about the studio market is that you can cater to anyone. There are women's studios out there that are just for a certain demographic, for women over a certain age. And so they feel like they're welcome there. But from an efficiency standpoint, you can get people through. I know a studio that only does 30-minute sessions. And that's their thing, and that's what they push out because, again, from an efficiency standpoint, I can get more people in. I can get typically a pretty much close to the same price point that I can for a 45 or a 50 or 60-minute session, but I get more people coming through the doors. So from an efficiency standpoint, they're getting more business savvy than they were just a few years ago, and is evidenced by the numbers on how much revenue they're generating square foot. And because their experience and the workout that they're providing can be sometimes greater in how they market themselves, they're able to charge a premium price point for it as well. So it's an efficiency model. It's getting more people through the doors. It's pricing themselves higher because of the experience that they're providing. And they don't have nearly, a ton of space that is going to be as much dead space as you would in a big box facility. So it's all being used at the same time.
Yeah. So would you say then, if you are a trainer wanting to make that next step, you've got to be a good trainer itself, but you're almost kind of creating a system or a machine where you've got to really understand the space that we're going to be doing it in, how many people you can get in the space, the efficiencies of moving people around, doing that workout, not having huge amounts of room to be doing a particular exercise, because that space sitting there is costing you money and will affect your profitability.
Oh, 100%. Any dead space is going to impact your profitability. You want all your space to be leveraged as much as possible. And so I think if you're a trainer thinking about going out there, what you're really talking about is programming. How do I create the best programs with the space that I have so all my space is being used? And there's a lot of organizations out there, yours included, Escape, that has the right equipment to make sure that you can fit the right number of people in a certain space, that your space is being utilized at all the time, and make sure that they're moving around in a way that is efficient, that makes people get to certain stations at the right time, that gets their workout in a way that makes sense, and that you can filter people in. I mean, it just becomes a conveyor belt, really, at the end of the day. So if you can get this down to a science, that is one of the biggest things that you have to find out as a business owner, as a studio owner, is how do I leverage the space? How do I put my training programs together so that I can get as many people through these doors and out the doors that are not only getting a great workout, but they're getting that great experience too.
So this one's not in the report, but it's raised a question with me. If you look at something like a yoga or Pilates studio where you've got these stations and you can kind of pack them in, or a spin studio, compared to something like a CrossFit or a HIIT studio, do you know, have you seen or heard the difference between the profitability of those two models? Because my guess after what you're saying is, if you've got something like a cycle, a yoga, a Pilates, you know exactly your space, you know exactly how many people you're going to do. There's no wasted space. Where HIIT, where you've got people on sleds and tires, naturally they're going to be bigger and there's not as much usable space.
Right.
Have you found anything out about that at all?
Ultimately, what we've found, the CrossFits are their own entity, right? The CrossFit boxes have found this niche in the market and have kind of just gone off on their own from a high intensity interval training perspective, and it hits a certain demographic that can be very profitable. But the issue sometimes with CrossFit boxes is that it's a very different experience from one box to the next, because you have a different owner a lot of the times, and sometimes what you get at a certain studio or a box is going to be very different at the other one. So the profitability might be kind of all over the place. Yoga and Pilates, you're right. A yoga studio, very rarely do you have a one-on-one yoga, appointment. And so a yoga studio is really going to be generating a bulk of their revenue on their classes and their class participants and how many people they can get into their classes. And ultimately, sometimes it's just one or two studios within a yoga facility. And same with Pilates. You can do one-on-one Pilates on a reformer. You got the Pilates mat class as well that you can generate more people within there. But ultimately, there's going to be a cap within those facilities because you can only get so many people through those doors. So if you're a Pilates studio that's 2,000 square feet and you've got 10 reformers and you've got another studio in the back that you can take 10 or 15 people to do a Pilates mat class, well, you're going to be tapped out at a certain amount of revenue, call it $300,000. Whereas at a multidiscipline studio or a high intensity interval training studio where you have the flexibility to bring in different types of equipment and have more people rotating through and doing different things and leveraging that space more, you can get more revenue generating just because you have so many more options than just a one discipline track. And so a lot of the trends that we're seeing now is that these one discipline facilities are looking at ways to expand. It's almost kind of full circle with the big boxes, right? A little bit,
Yeah.
Where they found that, I want to generate more revenue. How do I do that? And it goes back to the conversation we were having before about, do I expand or do I open up a second location? And the ones that are finding that they want to expand, it might not be the same discipline that they have now, but they're realizing there's an opportunity here to add another discipline that helps me generate that revenue that I want. The important component to that, though, is if you're going to expand and add a new discipline to your business, you don't want it to be yoga and cycling, right? You don't want a cycling studio going on next door, even if it's well insulated, next to a very Zen-like yoga studio. You want to make sure that the disciplines at least match up a little bit. So if it's yoga and Pilates, or if it's high intensity interval training with cycling, something like that would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, and we're seeing that. I'm seeing studios where they will have two rooms, and I guess the same rules apply to those double rooms really than
right.
what we're saying in terms of still getting as many people in there and those efficiencies.
Absolutely, 100%.
What's the and I'm kind of looking at here, and I'm not sure whether you got the figures, but what's your when you put all these together, and I guess people are thinking, well, this could be a profitable opportunity based on the fact we know the size and the amount of people coming in there. What's the typical average revenues for these studios? If you have to average it all out.
Yeah, it's going to be around $350,000, $400,000. That's typically on average what we've seen, and that's been consistent over the last 4 years that we've been doing these numbers. So you're going to be around 350, 400,000. I think our latest report, I think the average shows like 374,000 or something like that in terms of total revenue. And then your expense, from the expense side, your biggest expense line item is all of any fitness business owner knows is your staffing. It's going to be your team. And so that's ultimately where your staffing is going to play the biggest part, which is why, sometimes it's just the owner. They don't have the revenue sometimes to be able to pay for something like that. But your typical overhead expenses, you're going to be looking at about 200,000, when it's all said and done. I think it ended up being at like 185,000, I think, in our most recent report. So that's kind of where, if you're looking big picture, kind of broad view, that's kind of the generalized numbers that we see.
Yeah, so they're going to bring you back around about, sort of give or take, around about 150,000 per studio a year. That's what they're kind of making.
About that, yeah, give or take. Some making a little bit more, some making less.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And the, how much are people spending to kind of get up and running? Is there any averages that you've seen in that?
There are. So, and again, it goes back to what type of facility. So, but the averages, it can be around 100,000 typically on average, which is not a lot of money.
That's right, no.
When you talk about these big box facilities that are spending millions and millions of dollars.
Well, if you can if you can invest 100,000, you can be getting 150.
It depends on when you get in the black. Yeah. A lot of them take a loss on the first year, but it's that marketing plan. There's a statistic, I don't think it's in our most recent report, that I think it's in our 2016 or 2017 report, where we asked the audience, do you have a marketing plan? And I believe it was close to 60 or 70% of studio owners do not have a marketing plan. So when you look at kind of where the growth is going, now this was a couple years ago, so when we go back and look at the efficiency numbers, it's good to see that the square footage number is going up. But ultimately, there's still so much opportunity for growth within this space that it's really just in its infancy. When you think about this industry, the studio space is still relatively new. But ultimately, it can be something that grows significantly once these operators get more efficient at what they're doing within their businesses. So
you could be around about 100. Is the 100 the average, did you say, or is that?
It depends. I've seen businesses that are anywhere from 50,000, a functional training studio that has a front desk with, a CRM platform to run their business, and they've got a whole bunch of just functional equipment from Escape. They don't need a lot of money. That could be $30,000 to get them up and running. Between 30 and 50 grand. I've seen other studios that want the high end. They want the couple treadmills. They want a big jungle gym type atmosphere. They want a variety of other stations. They want the high end flooring, things like that. The bathrooms. The showers, the lockers, within still a 2,500 square foot space, and that can cost upwards of $150,000, $200,000. But still, again, that's a nominal fee compared to what the big boxes are spending to open up those facilities, and you don't need the massive amount of real estate that any of these big boxes do. You just need a storefront, a garage. That's not a recommendation, but I've seen it happen. So.
And that seems like I've certainly seen people in the sort of 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 that are investing. I guess so. From what you're saying is there? I guess you've got to be careful how much you invest in it, because if on average they're bringing in sort of 350 and you're spending 5, 6, 7 to get open, then that's going to be a difficult business based on the averages to make some money. Not necessarily relating to the report, but would you say there is a bit of a sweet spot to kind of almost say, look, for this type of thing, you really don't want to be spending more than X amount?
I would say if you go over $250,000, $300,000 to open up your studio, I think that would be a cap, in my opinion. Again, it depends. It also depends on where you're opening up the location. So if you're in New York City, and I don't think you're going to be able to open up a studio and provide the experience that those consumers within that city want to experience for $100,000, right? It's very different. And there are studios there that are making millions and millions of dollars. Their rent is also through the roof. But at the same time, it changes based off of where you are. So, if you're opening a studio in a major metropolitan area, it's going to cost you more money to get up and running, just because their costs are going to be more, your rent's going to be more, to staff it the right way to provide the experience that you want. It's not outside the realm of possibility that you're going to spend more than closer to $4,000 or $5,000 or $100,000. But if you're in other parts of the country, it's going to be a lower barrier to entry, and you might recoup your fees faster, but it might be a harder time finding the right clientele that you want, and your marketing plan is going to be very different. So, if you plop your studio into a major metropolitan area, you're already almost guaranteeing that you're going to get certain clientele to come. Maybe it's the millennial generation, depending on what your studio is. And so you've got this group already that is primed and molded and custom to what you're trying to do. You just have to differentiate yourself in terms of the experience, in terms of the lighting, in terms of the training and types of the programming. And so that's why you're seeing all these different types of studios opening up with all these kind of new bells and whistles. There's a studio, there's a jump roping studio. There's a trampoline studio. How are you going to constantly differentiate yourself is going to be something that's talked about a lot in the future within this space. So it depends. There's many
a lot of variables.
There are.
And with the, you mentioned about this target demographic and millennials. Are you seeing that at the moment this is predominantly millennial led? And second part of the question is there an opportunity now to kind of take this out of the big metropolitan cities and to have a different demographic, is that open space at the moment? What's your thoughts on those two?
Yes, so good question. So first part of it, from a millennial demographic, it is being driven by millennials. They have a lot of discretionary income to spend, which is interesting. They are also very savvy on social media. And within a boutique experience, there is something like social currency, I like to call it. There is something that taking a picture of yourself at a spin studio or after a workout with your trainer or something like that, that is social currency to people on social media. And I like to say, especially in today's market, health is now becoming the new wealth. There is not the stigma like it was in the past, where if I'm working out, it's kind of this unknown. I'm not sure, if it's right for me. I know it's healthy, but I'm not sure if it's, cool or something to do. Health has become the new wealth with all the education that's out there. We always knew it, but now with this space, millennials drive trends. When you look at it, millennials are driving the boutique experience because they believe that by going to these facilities, it's much cooler to go work out at a cycling studio or a personal training studio than it is to go work out in my big box club, because that's where the people are that are like me. And that's where they go. And that's why I'll spend the money, because again, I go back to the cycling studio because it's just that experience of this trainer and the lights and the music and the experience that you get that they'll pay for whatever it may be for that experience. And so I think they're driving the trend of this space, and it's starting to filter itself out into more urban and suburban, into more rural and suburban areas, that if you can find the right demographic, you can find the right target audience within these areas, that you can have a profitable business as well. Yeah. So it just depends.
Yeah. And I guess, based on what you said earlier, the cost to probably get this up and running outside of where they traditionally are, which is in the big cities, is going to be a lot lower.
Right.
Probably a lot easier for you to get started in, if you wanted to get into this business. I suppose an affluent, out of town area.
yeah, it's true. But there's also the limitation of that, because one of the reasons that this market is thriving is because of a convenience factor. Okay. And so when you think of convenience factor, let's take a yoga studio, for example. And typically when you walk into a big box facility, what happens? You walk in and they give you the tour, and they give you possibly a group exercise schedule, or they tell you to download it or find it online or something like that. And they have a vinyasa yoga class that happens on Tuesdays at 7 a.m. and Saturdays at 10 a.m. and Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. or something like that. And so I'm a consumer, and that's kind of what I'm interested in. It's convenient for me because this big box club is around the corner, but that doesn't fit into my lifestyle. I'm changing my lifestyle and how I want to attend this class based off of what the health club is doing. If I go to a yoga studio, I've got a pick of the litter, right? So they've kind of flipped the script where my lifestyle doesn't need to change. It's the studio that has the convenience opportunities that fits the lifestyle of the client and the consumer. And so you're seeing that. It's like, if I miss my Tuesday morning class, I can come back Tuesday afternoon and take the same class, or Tuesday evening or something like that. So it fits into the lifestyle of the consumer instead of the consumer fitting into the lifestyle of the big box. Yeah.
So it's a good point in terms of where you base then, that it's that convenience factor. It's like, well, what if it's not in a city where people work? Mm-hmm. What else are they doing? So I guess would an example be sort of like people like my wife, where they take children to school, sure, and you've got something kind of around there that you can tap into.
Absolutely, for sure. I mean, there's opportunities all over the place depending on where you are. It's just being able to tap into where that market is, and that's why you see, big metropolitan areas have so many different studios, because that's where all the people are. And it's convenient to walk to them, and it's easy to get your transportation to and from them, and it's easy, just to walk around the corner or walk a few blocks. And that's why you see this massive amount of studios in those big areas, because it's convenient for people to attend.
Yeah. I know boutique generally is unique and exclusive and predominantly sort of single discipline. Have you, do you think that is a model that's that people should continue to adopt, or do you think the business? Do you think the businesses succeed just a single discipline, or do you think as it evolves, you could be doing more things, or do you think that's almost like a negative because you're trying to be all things to all people?
It's a really good question. There is the danger of spreading yourself too thin. And my recommendation is if you're a trainer and your personal training, is your passion, open up a personal training studio. And do that extremely, extremely well. And once you've done that extremely well, if you want to branch out, if you want to expand, then you can start looking at adding on a cycling studio to your studio. You can add on yoga or Pilates or something like that. But there is the danger because you have to find the right people. You've got to build out the space. You've got to make sure that it's constantly being, again, back to the, cost per productivity and square footage and things like that. You got to make sure it's being used at all times of the day, because the last thing is you want to build out these spaces and they just sit idle for the most of the day, because then you're not generating any revenue on that square footage. It just sits there. So my advice and expertise from what I've seen is do one thing really, really well. I'll go back to my meeting with Todd Durkin. And Todd's got I think he's got about 3,500, maybe 4,000 square feet in a strip mall in San Diego. And Todd has trained, MVPs in football. He's trained Olympic athletes. He's been featured on TV shows. I mean, Todd could open up his own 10,000 square foot facility and just blow it out. And I asked him that question. I said, Todd, why don't you do anything other than, your personal training in your space? He goes, Josh, why? He goes, do you know what the experience is like for a high school kid to come out and work out next to Drew Brees? He goes, Drew Brees is a game away from going to the Super Bowl. He goes, you can't get that in 10,000 square feet. He goes, you just can't get that experience. He goes, I will never go any bigger. It's not about that for me. It's about that experience that people have that I can control within that space. And that's what he does. And he's done it better than anybody else in his area. So
yeah, he does. I've been up there and he does a fantastic job. And I agree with what you said about the experience. Mm-hmm. When I went up there, someone knew who I was, offered me protein drinks. Right? They just looked after me, gave me the tour. There was people working out outside. He was like, wow, this is exciting. I'd recommend anyone, if they can, to check that one out. So hours of opening, what is there any common things in terms of how many hours they tend to open a day, a week? I'm sort of looking at one of the pages here in your report.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that, and what are sort of things that people could take away from it?
We did an analysis in our most recent report as far as profitable studios versus those that weren't as profitable. And we wanted to see, the ones that are profitable, are they doing anything different than the ones that aren't? And a lot of what we found was common knowledge, but it was interesting to still see it on paper. They're open a little bit longer. The owner's working a little bit more hours to be able to kind of focus more on the business. And so for us, it was interesting to see from a revenue standpoint that the business owners that are taking the time to focus in on their business, they can still be training on the side, but they found a good balance. They found out what their new normal is, are the most profitable businesses. So they're open a few hours longer every week. They're putting in a few more hours every week. They understand that this is their business and this is what they have to focus on full time. It's not a side gig. There's a lot of people I talk to that are thinking about starting up their own studio, but I want to do this as a side thing. I've got this other job. It's not going to work, right? Any entrepreneur knows that. It's like you got to give it your all. Otherwise, it's going to come off as, half-assed, if you will. And so ultimately, the profitability of these studios was made up by these entrepreneurs that understood what it took to start a business and succeed in that business. And so they're the ones that are putting in the effort, and that effort is being seen by their profitability as well.
All right. So just kind of as we draw to an end, I'd like to ask you about the sort of challenges facing studio operators. But before I do that, I know there's a couple of things that you guys do, such as events and that. Maybe you could just share a little bit about your organization and how people can get involved in you and why they should.
Absolutely. It's a great question. So, of course, you can find out more about the association on our website, which is afsfitness.com. A is in Apple, F is in Frank, S is in Sam, fitness.com. Within there, you'll see everything that the association does. We keep a close eye on what's trending in this space. We do a ton of market research for our audience, for our members, to understand how to be profitable, what are the trends that are happening, how much revenue I should be generating per square foot. We do a mentorship program, we do online roundtable groups, we do meetups with our community to make sure that they can bounce ideas off each other. I like to say that our members are the ones that kind of get to success faster because they eliminate all the mistakes that others might have come before them because they had that community to engage. And we're solely dedicated to the entrepreneurial fitness professional who wants to start their business or is in business for themselves. So within that, as all associations do, we are a young company. We're just finishing up our 5th year. We just finished up our 5th year, and we're launching our very first event for the fitness studio industry, which is happening in April 12th to 14th in Irvine, California. So it's called Succeed, and it really is the first major event that is solely dedicated to this space. It's interesting because there's a lot of other groups, a lot of other associations, a lot of groups that do major events. And this market has always kind of been a side note to some of these other events. It's never been something that has been fully invested in as far as providing the education from marketing, leadership, operations, trends, programming. That's what our event is for one of the fastest growing segments of the entire industry. So Succeed, it's called, happening April 12th to 14th here in Irvine, California.
And where do people go to get information on that and the reports? What's the website? Social media?
Absolutely. So they can find us at AFS Community on social media. Our website, afsfitness.com, has a link right to our event website, which is succeedwithafs.com, so it all can be found online.
Okay, and the reports that we've talked about quite a bit, can you buy those around the world? How much do they cost? When are they? How often do you do them?
Great question. So we've got a number of reports. We do one major report we have in the past, which is our annual financial and operating benchmarking survey and report. But this year we're actually doing 3 major reports. We're going to be sending out a press release recently where we're going to be doing our financial one, but we're also going to be doing 2 additional reports. One's going to be all on marketing and sales and understanding kind of what these businesses are doing to drive business, because social media is the #1 traffic generator, along with word of mouth marketing, that a lot of these businesses use to market their business. So we want to dive into that more as well, along with the financial one that we do every year. And then we're also going to be doing kind of a future of the industry, understanding where the industry is going, what's changing, what the trends are. We're kind of building out our trend report to be a much larger entity that we're going to also release towards the end of this year too. So all those reports can be found on our website, in our store that houses everything. It can be bought no matter where you are in the world. We charge more for people that live overseas. No, I'm just kidding. They're all the pricing can be found on our website. Okay. They don't cost a ton of money. Our major reports cost a couple $100, and then we also have micro reports that we do that are $50. So.
And they're great. I've been getting them for I think about 3 years now, and whichever side of the industry you're on, there's some fantastic information to really get a feel. And I certainly continue to subscribe to them. So recommend that. So significant challenges then. So what are some of the things that are facing boutique operators that they need to look about outside of what we've really covered?
The biggest one is they don't make enough money.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit, whether it's 150, whether it's 50 grand, 60 grand, they always want to be making more. And so that's the #1 challenge that we find when you look kind of within their own businesses, within their psyche. And then the other challenges are...
Sorry to jump in, but what do you think is underneath that? Just bad, let's call it what it is. It's sort of bad management of the business, getting the right space, the right people, the right marketing. Is that what it really comes down to?
It comes down to all that stuff. Ultimately it's understanding what should you outsource and what should you do yourself. Understanding just the basics operations of running a business that any entrepreneur ultimately understands is that you need to make sure that you're firing on all cylinders in all different departments. So if you hate accounting, if you hate doing the books, outsource an accountant. Find somebody that's going to do that stuff, or definitely don't do that yourself. If you're not a master marketer, we'll find somebody that can help you do that. Now, that's one of the great things about an association is because we pre-vet these groups, so you can kind of leverage these people, and we provide preferential pricing on a lot of these services for our members in those general areas. But ultimately, it comes down to a variety of different factors. Pricing, programming, marketing, not having a structured plan, not having a future outlook, not just understanding kind of how your business is ebbing and flowing throughout the course of 12 months, not understanding where your retention is at, not understanding where your members are coming from and how to capitalize on that. So I mentioned before, social media is a big driver of that. Word of mouth marketing is probably number one or number two when it comes to driving business for these businesses. I mean, they leverage their clients better than anybody else as far as referrals are to generate the business that they have. And so that's what they constantly have to rely on because they don't have the marketing budgets that a lot of these big box clubs do. So yeah, definitely when you ask, what are the challenges? Not making enough money. Program development is constantly one of those things when we talk about maximizing your square footage, making sure that they know the right programs to have in place is something that I think is one of their biggest headaches. Not understanding how to drive the right people to their business. Marketing is a big one. Not finding enough qualified staff is one that we hear about all the time. I just can't find the right people to work in my business, and so where do I find these people? So those are really the top ones that we hear and see a lot.
Yeah, and I guess you've got, you live and breathe this all the time. So I know it's always difficult to predict the future, particularly when it's on camera. But what's your predictions for the future of this space in the next 5 years? What are some of the things you think will be happening? What does it look like?
I think what's going to happen, we're going to start seeing a cannibalization within this space. There are some major groups out there with a lot of money to spend that I think are going to start cannibalizing the space. I think there's that low cost membership model group that ultimately probably isn't going to go anywhere, but the boutique space is not going anywhere just because it's too easy to get into and you don't need a lot of overhead and you can be profitable in it if you find the right space in the right market. So I think that part is definitely going to grow. It's going to taper off at some point, but ultimately I think there's going to be some cannibalization that's going to happen within that space. You're going to see a lot of these businesses understanding, how to become educated to run their businesses the right way. I think there's going to be new technologies that are going to come out. There already is when you talk about AR and VR and things like that, augmented reality and virtual reality that are going to have an interesting place within this space. I don't necessarily know how interesting it's going to be. I mean, there are virtual reality studios that are coming out. There's one called Black Box that actually won the Consumer Electronics Show Award last year in 2018. Where it's all virtual reality. So whenever I give a talk, people say, is my job going to be obsolete in 5 years? I was like, no, of course not. People are always going to want that personal touch. But then you look at the future of the industry and you see companies like Peloton that are out there that are creating a studio boutique experience within your home. So you talk about a convenience factor without having to leave your home. But I do remember seeing a podcast or an interview with one of the co-founders of Peloton that said, look, even though I created this, I still go and visit my studio a couple times a week because there's that human interaction that can't be replicated. And it can't be replicated on, properly showing somebody how to do a bench press and spotting them and stuff like that, and making sure they don't get injured. There's a human connection that we all crave that can't be replicated no matter how much technology that we have. So technology is going to be a major part in where this space goes in the future. I think more of that technology is going to get ingrained within these facilities in the experience perspective and just being able to pull information about the client and have a client profile so that you can really tap into what makes them tick. There's going to be new technologies that I've seen firsthand that are going to eliminate the need for a wearable heart rate monitor that are using sensors built into the studio that can actually track a person's exertion, can track a person's form, in which that member can then go back and look up their workout on their platform and see exactly how they performed without the need of a wearable device. It's crazy. Yeah, I know. It's pretty cool stuff that I've seen firsthand that I think is going to shape, again, the experience. So then think about that. If you're a trainer or an owner in that facility, I can go in and see what that person did for that workout. I've got a full profile of what that member does and how they work out and the exertion that they created that I can basically customize and personalize their workout the next time they come in. So there's a lot of cool stuff that's going to be happening in that space. And again, these studios are prime to really kind of leverage this. And then, from the other side of things, you look at the healthcare perspective on where things are going. And, as a nation, the U.S., we're only getting unhealthier. which is unfortunate. With all the knowledge that we have, with all the information at our fingertips, from the moment that you go to the doctor's office from getting, a script to go see a physical therapist or to start a workout regimen, I think studios are a prime position to be able to kind of welcome in these individuals from a physician referral. But there's a lot of different politics that go into that we don't have enough time for today. But I think there's a huge opportunity for these studios because, again, I mentioned before, a studio can create an environment and an atmosphere that can breed this feeling of together we can accomplish anything. And that together we can accomplish anything can be done in a women's only studio, in a baby boomers only studio, in a millennial driven studio. And I think these facilities are prime locations for that person who is fearful of going into a larger facility and feeling like all the eyeballs are on me, and going into a facility like a studio in which you are supported from the moment that you walk in, and there's this feeling, this cheers effect, that everybody knows my name, and it's this high-touch, results-driven culture that makes me feel welcome. And I think that, and this space, is something that I think can really help the future of this industry.
Yeah.
So it's exciting times.
Yeah, excellent. So last question then, Josh. Escape Your Limits is about escaping something either you or others have believed is impossible and then going on to make it possible. What would be a sort of recent example of you escaping your own personal limits?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question.
Apart from having your daughter a little while ago.
Yeah, and getting a good night's sleep. One of the things I think I've escaped is, as an entrepreneur, it can be very lonely at the top, right? And one of the things as you start a company, and this is and I relate this to a lot of our members because they're not sure if they should take the leap and, escape their limit of within the four walls of their current, big box club, let's call it. And they're not sure if they should take that leap. And my advice to them, and it was my advice to myself, is that it's hard. No matter what you do, it is hard. If this was easy, everybody would want to do it, right? And so there are moments in which you're going to bang your head against the wall. And it's going to happen even when you're in business after 5, 6, 7, 10, 15, 20 years. And my advice, and something that I've always stuck to, is that I've had investors, not within my company, but just investors in companies say, stick it out. If you are onto something and you get that feeling, stick it out. You're going to have hard days. You're going to have, great days. It's a roller coaster ride, no matter how you look at it. But ultimately, if you stick it out over time, that roller coaster ride isn't going to become as, up and down as it's been in the past. It's going to become a little bit more fluid, and you're going to find out things that work and things that don't, but stick at it. And so for my personal, experience, it's just as an entrepreneur and taking the leap out of my comfort zone to be able to launch a company that I believe. I was talking to an investor of ours who didn't invest but thought about it, and he's watched our growth over the last 5, 6 years, and he goes, Josh, I'm impressed. He goes, you had the foresight to just be able to see where this industry was going to go and create an organization that supports these groups. And I said, what, that's true. I did have the foresight back then to say that. Now, I didn't know this is where the industry was going to explode to. I had a feeling, and I stuck with it. So for me to escape my limits was to escape, where I was stuck as a business owner, and understanding where I wanted to take my career and to make that leap, and to be okay with making that leap, and to be okay with understanding that you might not make a lot of money at the beginning, and to make sure that you're prepared for that, so that ultimately where you are now in your career can be very different and kind of create the lifestyle that you want in the future. So it takes a lot, but if you've got the pathway and you can see that vision, then kudos to you. It's something great if you can make it happen.
Yeah, and that's a great. It's a great summary, and I think one of the things I've taken away from this conversation is, it is good and it's important to know your product and to be passionate about it and want to make it work. And I guess being part, not to be plugging the organization, but if you are in that position, to some of these small details here that I guess you get from a mentor or an organization and people who have seen this, it's the difference in a lot of cases between success and failure, and it's also the difference between kind of being successful straight out of the gate. If you know this, you could go and sign up, as an example, a 5,000 square foot facility straight off, and then suddenly after 3 or 4 years, when you're locked into a lease, realize actually I'm better off with the smaller one. So I guess the information you've got here for people who haven't seen it is extremely valuable. And if I was opening a studio, there's some answers I've got straight away. And I know, there's a lot of differences at either end of the spectrum, but in general, there's some nice averages here that kind of help take you in the right direction. And as this is such a new and emerging part of the industry compared to, like we term the big boxes, where you can follow people, they've been doing it for 20, 30 years. This is very, very new, and I guess it's quite important to kind of make sure you know what you're getting yourself into from the beginning. So yeah, fantastic podcast. I recommend, if anyone can, get to the event. And Josh, I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.